Final Fantasy has had its share of memorable villains. We got the silver-haired diva with mommy issues, the prankster co-worker more concerned with the blood on his shoes than the fact of how it got there, the giant space whale who makes daddy issues, and a tree? And whoever these guys are. Tactics has always been an outlier in this series, and its villain sits somewhere in the middle here. I show a picture, but we don't really have one. And I suppose that is a good place to start when it comes to discussing Ultima and her host Ajora Glabados. As a quick pretext here, I will not be discussing FF12 much, not in this video at least, and this won't be much of a visual discussion since we see very little of Ajora himself. So we begin then with the funny St Ajora, the martyr, founder, and figurehead of the Church of Glabados. Yet, we aren't even aware Ajora is our primary villain until the last quarter of the game. Thankfully, unlike Necron, we do at least know of his existence. And even then, whether Ajora himself is present is actually debatable. In a last-ditch effort to resurrect his master, the Lucavi Hashmill sacrifices himself, and as a result, his master awakens within the host body Alma. But our brave Beowulf heroine is able to drive the unholy spirit from her body. We have two Almas. Well, kind of. And then this happens. What the hell? What's going on here? Piecing together the fragments of both versions of the Zodiac Brave story, I think I might have a plausible explanation as to what happened and why. And whether you agree or disagree, let me know down below. I'd love to discuss this more thoroughly with viewers. And while you're at it, hit like and subscribe so that Catastrophe 2 does not befall me. And with that out of the way, here then is what I think is the most important question. At what point was Ajora possessed by the Lucavi Ultima? Within Tactics, there are two conflicting stories regarding Ajora, and we the player never receive the full details of either one of them. It's like when a friend tries to recount some funny tale of when they were drunk, but you realize they're drunk now. There's pieces missing. So foremost, let's recap the two versions of Ajora Glabados that we get, and then we'll move on to what may be really going on here. Throughout the game, we often hear Ajora's name come up in reference to the Zodiac Zones, also known as the Aura Site in the War of the Lions version. This name is a notable change, derived from the fact that Tactics was retroactively connected to Final Fantasy XII, but we'll not delve too deeply into that here. The Glabados Church props Ajora up as a leader, a martyr, and a saint. Gods, or is it God's, chosen child that at birth rose up and forewarned the coming of the Black Plague. Interestingly, while the English version refers to him as male, the Japanese version refers to Ajora as female, with the cut content even supporting this. And while I think that Ajora being female likely makes more sense, I'm sticking to the English translation. As he grew into a man, Ajora preached of paradise and, well, we really don't know what else, and led 12 Zodiac Brave in a charge against the demons summoned by the King of Limberry. Oh boy, that sounds familiar. Who in turn had killed the king and took his place. Fearing his growing influence and the rise of the Glabados Church, the Holy Adoran Empire hired Germanique to spy upon Ajora. Germanique therefore became the 13th and last disciple of Ajora. And when Germanique informed of Ajora's preaching of paradise and the collection of Zodiac Zones, the Empire ensnared Ajora and hung him for a heretic. At the moment of his death, a great catastrophe befell the Adoran city Mullonde, the center of the Pharaoh's teaching, and so sank into the sea and into history. And Ajora upon his death, child of the gods, rose to paradise and sainthood. That is one version of the tale. When examining the scriptures of Germanique, Ramsev reveals that Ajora was in fact a very different man, a mortal man, whose greed led him to spy upon the various nations and stir further unrest among them. Ajora sought power through governance of blind faith over his followers, and supposedly a spy dispatched to the Holy Adoran Empire to facilitate its downfall. Although a spy for whom, we cannot say, and perhaps doesn't really matter. And in turn, Germanique was hired to collect the evidence necessary to charge and arrest Ajora. And in the scriptures he even confirms that Ajora did assemble some of the stones. Strangely, there was no report of a demon within Limberry. I'm starting to see a pattern here of rumors connected to Limberry. A great tragedy, however, did befall Mullonde upon the funny saint's death. Germanique does confirm this, and the events of the game 1200 years later also confirms this. So those are the two sides of the tale of St. Ajora Glabados. What can we take from this? I think it's fair to say that there are truths in both stories, and even more that is unrevealed to us. We don't get many specifics, but rather an abridged tale. Let's start with what we know. Ajora gained followers to create a church. Ajora did gather at least some of the zodiac stones. Germanique was a spy for the Holy Adoran Empire. Germanique turned over evidence that got Ajora arrested and hung as a heretic. The center of the Adoran Empire, Mullonde, was buried in the sea by a great catastrophe right after. Yeah, ain't much, is it? Elder Simon writes that the church sought to hide Ajora's more nefarious side, and so used the beloved legends of the Zodiac Braves to elevate him to sainthood. It was a simple feat to convince the people that St. Ajora had led the Zodiac Braves to defeat a demon that never existed. But as he's reading this, Ramza in turn reminds us. Elder Simon wrote that St. Ajora's demon never existed, yet I have seen the dark power of the Zodiac Stones with my own eyes. And so we have. Germanique's version of the story would have us believe that there were never any demons, and so too would Elder Simon. But both we and Ramza, and some others, know that is untrue. So here's what I think happened. Bear with me. It is my belief that Ajora's birth was a difficult one, and upon his dying, the Virgo stone awakened, and hearing a soothing, compelling voice, his parents conceded to the stone to save their son's life. And thus, Ajora was never a mortal man. Not really. Almost from the moment of his birth, he was always Ultima. We only ever see the Zodiac Stones awaken and a pact offered when a character is near death. Elmdor is rumored to have died on the battlefield, but purportedly held the Gemini Stone at the time, given to him by the church, with him likely having no knowledge of his true nature. This is the same manner that Wheatgraph and Dice the Dark became Lucavi. As well, when faced with a fatally injured Merrick, Rafa's desperate pleas to the Scorpio Stone resurrects her brother. This gives merit to the idea that what power the stone releases greatly depends on the holder's nature and desire. But we'll save that for another video. The church's version of the story claims that Ajora rose to his feet after he was born, and walked to a well in town and foretold of death to come. Now, if you know anything of baby anatomy, you know that that is absolutely impossible. But maybe not if Ajora's body was fueled by the power of the Lucavi. If you accept the idea that Ajora was always Ultima, I think his tale begins to make much more sense. Germanique confirms that Ajora did collect several of the stones. Notably though, Germanique doesn't say all of the stones. And one thing that has always bothered me in tactics is the fact that we only ever see a few of the Lucavi. Why? Why did the other stones never awaken? Did they truly never find a potential host to make a pact with? Well, the reason for that is that as the Lucavi's leader, Ultima must perform some magic with the stones to link them to the other Lucavi. Therefore, the same demons that we see awaken in Ramsa's time are in fact the same stones that Ajora was able to gather 1200 years ago. Not all of them, but half of them. It would also explain why the Lucavi seemed unconcerned with the whereabouts of some of these stones and finding them a suitable host. From here, the two tales seem to follow the same trend. Ajora began to gather followers to him. So many, in fact, that the Holy Ajoran Empire began to feel threatened. And Ajora, acting as a spy to cause disruption among the nations, fits very well with Ultima. Although we don't know the Lucavi leader's true intentions, I wonder if her attempts to gain power were to essentially build herself an army, both a mortal and demonic one. One to overthrow the mortal world, and one to overthrow her overseers. The gods that cast the rebellion Lucavi to the earth, the Akuria themselves, and the paradise that Ajora spoke of? Could it be in the skies, above the ancient city of Guravagan, home to the gods? Ultima likely thought herself untouchable. Given the story of a demon summoning within Limberry, I would suppose that meant that Ultima, disguised as Ajora, bestowed the stones upon influential and powerful people she believed were suitable hosts to the Lucavi, and so made a show of defeating the demon, when in reality, the Lucavi retreated into his host's body for public appearances. My bet being, it was Zalera. This brings us then to Germanique and Ajora's death. It's heavily hinted that Ramsa and Alma are descended from Germanique. And this could explain then why Alma was a suitable host for Ultima. Their fates are tied. Perhaps even Germanique himself became a stone bearer. However, I do not think that Germanique's recounting can be wholly trusted either. Very likely, he was persuaded to give a much more mundane accounting of Ajora to run in opposition to the church's tale. For if the truth of the demons was released, it would give credence to the church's proclamations of Ajora's sainthood. After all, as Ramsa reminds us, the demons are quite real. In either tale, there is no dispute that Ajora was tried and hung and died for his crimes. Although, how the Empire managed to subdue a demon and her cohorts is elaborated on. I'm of the mind that Germanique played a role in this as well. An unsung hero that fought against the Lucavi and worked with the Empire to subdue Ultima. However, hanging a world-destroying demon hardly seems like it would work. The Golgotha gallows is said to be where Ajora was hung, but Mullonde sank into the sea thereafter. How could Ajora have been buried there? That is, after all, why the Lucavi go there to resurrect Ultima. They need to bring her new host to where her soul had been sealed within Ajora's corpse. And why would it require so strong a magic, hidden within the scriptures, to reach Mullonde and resurrect their leader? And why would it be in the scriptures? Let's examine for a moment the only other known disciple in Ajora's age. Belius, the first disciple. He was hunted down by the Ajoran Empire and killed in a place that would later be known as the Belius Tor. Besides Germanique, this is the only other disciple that we know of. What's interesting here is that his name sounds like a variation of Belias. My theory then is that the church discovered that by killing Belias' host body, they were able to banish the demon as well. And this was how they would defeat Ultima. Perhaps knowing of no other way to cast her out, they killed Ajora in hopes that killing the host would subdue the demon. And that does in fact seem to be the case. Although Ajora died, Ultima was evidently still tied to her host's body. Thus, when Alma is able to separate herself from the Lucavi, there is still a vessel left behind. The summoning of Ultima also meant the summoning of the body of Ajora, her prison. So what then became of the other Lucavi 1200 years ago? What of the city Mullonde? How did it fall? If Ultima was responsible for the link of the stones to the Lucavi's resurrection, I think then in turn, the Lucavi's fate is also tied to Ultima. And so I think the answer is obvious. Ajora wasn't hung. Ultima was defeated within Mullonde. And just as we see, when Ramza defeats the Lucavi leader in the airship graveyard, her defeat resulted in an explosion that sank the city. And therefore, the hanging was always a lie. Or perhaps a staged ruse with a doppelganger, to further the idea that Ajora was nothing more than mortal. Knowing that Ultima was not defeated, but rather slept, Germanique hid within his writings the magic to open a portal to her resting ground. Then hope, rather than belief, the reign and terror of the Lucavi might at last be ended. But instead, the cycle begins anew.